Sometimes when I go to museums, I go and select a painting that gives me a little bit of a feedback I want to learn from a certain artist's style. It's almost like reading a book. When you read a book, you go through the research that someone spent time and developed, took action on that idea. And a painting is the same way. I selected a period during the Renaissance, early 1400s, that can have the technique that I was reading about in El Libro dell'Arte by Cennino Cennini. So I tried to use that same system as I was doing this. Of course, a little different with different pigments. For example, they use vermilion, I'm using cadmium red. I don't want to go and track the exact pigment that they have. I kind of trust the way they were described and the way they look. I'm painting in my studio, not in the museum. In the museum, I go to compare and contrast, write notes, and from almost a memory work, I come back, I'm doing it through several stages. What I want to get is a lesson. I want to learn a certain thing, and I think today will be my last session for that. I saw myself coming back to this painting by Fra Angelico at the Uffizi Gallery, and I like the subtleties. For that time when Masaccio was painting, in that same room, in fact, you can see the contrast of the way they painted. So I really like the refinement, the love that he used to put. The artwork will carry the thoughts and the psychological happenings within the artist. Basically, the way I interpreted the process by Cennino Cennini was that first he gets a sharpened charcoal stick and he will outline the drawing, so carefully draw the whole thing, and with the feather he would just go over it to make it lighter. And then on top of this he will get the medium that he's painting with, which is a pigment, maybe a binder, oils or water if it was tempera, and he will go over this outline in a wet manner, connecting everything and having it very delicate. And I'm guessing he will put articulation, because he's not very detailed, but you can imagine by looking at the paintings how much information is there. And it's not overwhelming, it's simplified, but everything that is important, everything that is a landmark has to be there present. The way I went about the copy was to go to the museum. First day was just drawing proportions. I was playing with the symmetry that they have, the simplicity, and try to grab Fra Angelico's feeling of the outline. The important part for me was to start lightly so I wouldn't abuse the paper, erasing too much, and have a nice proportion that I can work on later. After the drawing, I added the gold leaf because I wanted to create a nice surrounding and isolate the figure. Once I put the gold leaf in the background, I went to check again because now I have a better look at the figure. So I went for the last time to check that the drawing and my proportions was correct the way I wanted it. If I continue working in the order that Cennino Cennini recommends, it's time for me to do the surroundings. So I started with the blue to start mapping out all the local colors around the flesh. The ultramarine blue was less chroma than I thought. So my pigment had way more chroma intensity, saturation, than the one in the museum, but I cooled it down and it was pretty good of a match. When this dries, he puts for the flesh color, which was my interest in this copy, a green underpainting, so terra verde, which is a green earth. He will put it underneath everything that will be flesh. When this dries, he will get a color that he will call verdaccio, because it's kind of like a greenish, but it's made of dark yellow ochre, a little bit of ivory black, so you can see how that's starting to create that green, a touch of white, and a little bit of chinabrese, which is earth red. But I guess that has to be very little to not take away from the greenish look, like a yellowish look. And that's the way the flesh will be done with a dry brush, having 3 different values. So you have one for the lights, one for the halftones, and one for the shadow. And that way, modeling every form according to the light source and intensity. So you can see here already modeled, but very greenish. And this is the color I'm gonna use underneath to be able to glaze that over and over. And every stage I let that dry so the colors don't mix into the other because I'm working with oils. The original painting is made in tempera, so of course the medium is different, but I'm trying to capture the same look and the same process. It cannot be too far. If I judge it with my eyes and try to match it, doesn't matter if I'm using the same tools or mediums. I took it back to the museum to check if the green was the type of green that I was looking for. I look at different paintings of that time and look for places maybe unfinished areas or areas that can look that the green was still there. I was happy with my green and went on back in the studio to keep painting. After this is dry, to offset that green, he will get the red with the same value range, the 3 ranges, and cancel out, go over, glaze those green areas and make it transitional. But it has to look like the green is underneath with that yellow, so it looks like flesh, like the transparency of flesh. I got some of the warm colors, the reds with the whites, and little by little glaze it. And I probably did about 3 layers over this grisite, letting each dry. And today I'm putting final glazes. I went for the last time, I saw some problems that I had. For instance, it could be a little darker under the chin to enhance the form of the face. The interesting points that Cennino Cennini talks about is to paint it very smoky, like smoke. So that's the word for sfumato, and that's what it means, to make all the gradations very clear. But at the same time of saying it clear, it means foggy, but precise. It's not smudging it, it's turning it softly with intention. The line in between the lips in mine could be a little darker and also keep that intensity of the red. And for the dark of the lips, I'm just gonna get the red, cadmium red that I have with black, and get it really nice and intense. Around the neck, I saw some of the dark parts could be lighter. I think I went too dark on the halftones. And that's a matter of intensity. I see that some areas in the light could be more chromatic in the neck. This painting is very simplified. It still has a lot of information. When we look closely at the painting, we see all these forms turning it. It's like magic, how he put so much information in such a subtle way. Lighting up the baby's torso a little bit more. I got one of the colors underneath my unfinished part that I still left a little bit undone, and I saw that it was similar to that. So I need to rescue a little bit of that coolness for the flesh and not be timid about putting it there. I saw that the baby's eyes were also darker than the paintings. It has to be a lighter version, but yellower. And I keep that in mind as I'm fixing my painting. My curiosity sometimes is to read through paintings. The same way we read the visual world, I like to go to museums and look at paintings and try to read them. We learn to read objects as painters. We need to look at nature and see patterns and see textures. The first kind of things that we created, they were a mixture of the imagination and also nature. So the spiritual part of the material world as well. And since everything in nature is different and everybody sees differently, there is no experience that will be equal to another in terms of looking and interpreting an object. The concept of numbers, you can rely on them and have a 5 equal to another 5. But in nature, no 5 apples can be the same. Depending on how detailed or how in depth you go, you're gonna find out that everything is very different. This type of training, this type of reading a painting is closer to how the painters used to learn back then. Now we are getting a lot of information and we try to learn by making sense out of things. Before, it was the opposite. Before, they got to do it, to get the simple tools and solve the problems, and then they try making sense out of that process. That's why I prefer going into the museum and trying to read the books and do it myself. This kind of exercises would definitely influence my work, and I have a dialogue with history, and I like that.